Her name was Carol. She had been working with Tina Turner for 11 years by the time the 50th anniversary tour reached Kansas City, which meant she had been present for enough of the private moments to understand the difference between the moments that required her presence and the moments that required her absence. This distinction, which sounds simple but is in practice one of the most important things a person in her position can develop, had taken her years to calibrate, and she had calibrated it through the specific education of watching a woman who was in her public life one of the most watched and documented and discussed performers in the history of popular music, and who was, in her private life, someone who guarded her interior experience with the careful precision of a person who understands that the interior experience is the only thing that is entirely, irreversibly her own. Carol knew when to be present, she knew when to be invisible, and she knew, though she had never been told this directly, had understood it through the accumulated evidence of 11 years, that the 10 minutes before Tina Turner walked onto a concert stage were not hers to be present in unless she was needed for something specific and practical. On the night of October 11, 2009, in the Sprint Center in Kansas City, she was needed for something specific and practical for the first 9 of those 10 minutes. The costume was exactly right, the hair was exactly right. The earrings, which had been slightly wrong when the first pair was presented and had been replaced with a second pair that was exactly right, were in place. The microphone had been tested, the earpiece was fitted and functioning. The shoes, which Tina had worn on stages in more than 60 cities over the course of this tour and which had been resoled twice in the process, were on her feet. Everything that Carol's job required her to have done was done. She stepped back. She said, "I'll be right outside." Tina Turner, seated on the small couch in the backstage dressing room at the Sprint Center, looked at her for a moment. Carol had seen this look before. It was not the look of someone who needed something additional, not the look that preceded a request or a correction or a direction. It was the look of someone who is receiving a kindness and knows it and does not have the language for it in this particular moment, because this particular moment requires all available language for something else. She said, "Thank you." And Carol went out and closed the door. What happened in that room in the next 10 minutes was not witnessed by anyone. This is the essential fact around which everything else in this account arranges itself. The 10 minutes were private, belonged entirely to Tina Turner, were not filmed or recorded or observed by any person whose testimony could make them available to the public record. What Carol knew of those 10 minutes, she knew from what she had understood before she left the room and what she saw when the door opened again, and from the specific quality of a woman's face when she has just come through something interior and is ready to go out and give 60,000 people what they came for. But she had been working with Tina Turner for 11 years. She knew how to read what was readable. The tour was called Tina. 50th Anniversary Tour. The mathematics of it were straightforward. 50 years since the night in 1958 when Anna Mae Bullock had climbed onto a stage at Club Manhattan in East St. Louis and taken a microphone from a band leader and sung into it and made a room understand something about what sound could do to the people in it. 50 years from that night to this one, from that small club with its low ceiling and its pressed close audience to an arena in Kansas City with 18,000 people in it, from 17 years old and unknown to 69 years old, and as known as any performer in the world. She had spent those 50 years giving to rooms. This is not a metaphor, and it is not an abstraction. It is a literal description of what she had done, the specific and repeatable and never quite routine act of walking into a space where people had gathered to receive something and giving it to them, night after night across 5 decades, in clubs and theaters and arenas and stadiums and the specific places in between that don't have a clean category, in every city that had a stage large enough to hold her and an audience willing to fill it. The 50th anniversary tour had been, from its first night, something different from the other tours. Not in its production. The production was large and expertly assembled. The staging and lighting and sound, the work of professionals who had been doing this at this level for long enough to do it without calling attention to the doing. Not in her performance. She gave the same performance she had always given, which is to say the complete one, the one that held nothing back. The one that had been making people in the front rows and the back rows feel simultaneously intimate and together since she was singing in a children's choir in Nutbush, Tennessee. The difference was in the air around the tour. The specific quality of an event that people understood, without being told, was finite, that this was the last time. That she had decided, with the same quiet certainty that characterized her important decisions, that 50 years was the shape of this particular chapter, and that the chapter was now closing. The audiences understood. They came with the specific attention of people who know they are present for something that will not come again in the same form, and they gave back to her, across the 90 cities and the 14 countries and the 2 years of the tour, something that she would describe later as unlike anything she had experienced in 50 years of performing. Which is a remarkable thing for a woman who had performed at the Maracanã in front of 182,000 people to say, and which suggests that what the audiences of the 50th anniversary tour were giving was not simply volume or scale or enthusiasm, but something more specific and more personal. The gratitude of people who understood exactly what they had been given and were trying to say so before the opportunity to say it was gone. In Kansas City, the tour was in its final weeks. There were 12 more cities after this one. 12 more nights in 12 more arenas, 12 more sets of those 10 minutes backstage, and then the last one, the last city, the last night, the last 10 minutes, and then it would be over, and she would go to Switzerland and live beside the lake and not come back. She knew this. Carol knew this. Everyone on the tour knew this, in the way that everyone knows things that have not been said directly but are so clearly present in the shape of events that they don't require saying. She had been sitting alone in that dressing room for 9 minutes when Carol came back. The door opened and Carol came in, and Tina Turner was sitting on the small couch exactly as Carol had left her, the same position, the same posture, the same hands folded in her lap. But something in the room had changed in the 9 minutes Carol had been outside it, in the way that rooms change when something has happened in them. Carol had been working with her for 11 years. She knew what a room looked like when nothing had happened in it, and she knew what a room looked like when something had, and this room looked like the latter. She said, 5 minutes. Tina Turner looked up at her. Her eyes were clear, not wet, not the eyes of someone who has been crying or is about to, but the specific clarity of eyes that have just come through something and are now on the other side of it. Carol had seen this look before too, though not often. It was the look of someone who has been somewhere interior and has returned from it, the specific quality of a person who has just finished a conversation with themselves about something important and has arrived at whatever the conversation was trying to arrive at. She said, "I was thinking about Nutbush." Carol did not ask about Nutbush. She did not need to. She had worked with this woman for 11 years, and she understood that what had just been said was not the opening of a conversation, but the closing of the one that had been happening in the room while Carol was outside it. Tina Turner had been thinking about Nutbush, about the Spring Hill Baptist Church and the children's choir and the flat cotton fields and the Sunday mornings when the voice that would eventually carry her to 69 cities and 14 countries had first done what it was going to keep doing for 50 years, which was go inside people and move something there. She said, "Are you ready?" And Tina Turner stood up. This is the moment that Carol, when she would later describe the night to people she trusted, would always pause before continuing, not for effect, not to create a dramatic beat, but because the standing up contained something she had never found adequate language for. She had watched Tina Turner stand up and walk onto stages for 11 years. She had watched it in cities on 4 continents, in venues of every scale and description, in conditions that ranged from perfect to very difficult. She had watched it 100 times, and she had never once watched it without feeling the specific thing that happens when a person who is about to do something extraordinary commits to doing it, the shift from interior to exterior, from the private world of whatever has just been processed in the dressing room to the public world of the stage and the audience and the 50 years of accumulated giving that were about to happen again, one more time, in Kansas City. Tina Turner stood up, and the woman who had been sitting alone on a small couch thinking about a church in Tennessee became, in the act of standing, the woman that 18,000 people were waiting for. The walk from the backstage dressing room to the stage entrance at the Sprint Center was approximately 4 minutes. Carol walked slightly behind her and slightly to the left, which was where she always walked. The corridor was the kind of corridor that exists backstage in every large arena, concrete, functional, lit with the utilitarian lighting of a space that was never designed to be noticed, that exists only to connect the private space to the public one. There were crew members at intervals along the way, and each of them acknowledged her passage in the specific way of people who have been in the presence of someone significant for long enough to understand that the acknowledgement should be quiet. A nod, a small smile. The professional courtesy of people who know that what is about to happen requires her full attention and are not going to interrupt it. She did not speak during the walk. This was not unusual. She rarely spoke during the walk, for the same reason that she had asked for the 10 minutes alone, because the transition from private to public, from interior to exterior, required something of her that she had learned over 50 years to protect and prepare rather than spend on conversation. The walk was part of the preparation. The silence was part of the preparation. By the time she reached the stage entrance and heard the sound of 18,000 people who did not yet know she was 40 seconds away, she would be exactly ready. Carol stopped at the stage entrance. This was where her job ended and Tina Turner's began, the specific boundary that existed at the edge of every stage she had ever stood at the entrance of, the line between the world where Carol could do something useful and the world where the only person who mattered was the one walking through it. She said, "Have a great show." Tina Turner turned and looked at her for a moment. The same look as before, in the dressing room, the one that Carol had learned to recognize as the look of someone receiving a kindness in a moment when the language for it is not available. Then she turned back toward the stage, and the roar from the crowd as the lights went down reached them both where they were standing, and Carol watched her walk forward into it. 18,000 people got what they came for that night. They got the voice and the body and the presence and the 50 years of everything that had been built into both the Nutbush Church and the East St. Louis clubs, and the 16 years and the 36 cents and the rebuilding and the Grammy stage and the Maracana and all the cities and stages in between. They got the performance that Tina Turner gave to every audience in every room she ever walked into, which was the complete one, the one that held nothing back, the one that had been making people feel something real since she was 8 years old, and a woman in the front pew had cried at the sound of her voice. Carol stood at the stage entrance for a minute after she had gone. She could hear the roar of 18,000 people receiving what they had come to receive. She had been working with this woman for 11 years, and in 11 years she had never once stood at a stage entrance and listened to the crowd and thought about what it cost to produce that sound, the specific and enormous cost of 50 years of giving everything to every room, of protecting the one thing that made the giving possible, of sitting alone for 10 minutes in a dressing room in Kansas City thinking about a church in Tennessee before walking out to give 18,000 more people the thing she had been giving since she was a child. She thought about it now. There were 12 more cities, 12 more nights, 12 more sets of 10 minutes, and then it would be finished, and she would go to Switzerland, and the lake would be there, and the quiet would be there, and Irwin would be there, and the thing that had started in a church in Nutbush, Tennessee, in 1951, would have run its full course and arrived at its ending. Carol turned and walked back down the corridor toward the dressing room. She had things to do. There would be a costume change in 40 minutes. The second pair of earrings needed to be ready. The water needed to be exactly the right temperature. Behind her, the roar of the crowd was continuous, enormous, and very much alive. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more untold moments from the lives of music's greatest legends, the 10 minutes before the stage, the walks down the corridor, the quiet rooms where everything was gathered before the giving began. And if you've ever stood at the edge of something that was ending and felt the full weight of it, tell us about it in the comments. Hit the notification bell so you never miss one of these stories.